Chapter 2: The Screenplay. A screenplay is a literary expression of the story, characters, actions, locations, and tone of your film written in a specified dramatic script format. Whether you write the script yourself or work with someone else's material, it's important to remember that the screenplay is not the final product. It's an intermediate step in the production of a film and serves many functions in all stages of the project's development. It is often said that the screenplay is the blueprint for the entire process of making a film, in the same way that an architect's rendering serves as the blueprint for the construction of a house. In many ways, this is true. However, unlike an architectural blueprint, a screenplay should remain a rather more flexible document throughout the process. It's important to keep in mind that screenplays evolve. They should be revised and rewritten at every stage of a film's progression, as new ideas or circumstances emerge. Stages of script development. There are a number of stages in the evolution of a screenplay, and each stage usually requires various drafts. Each stage has a specific purpose as you proceed, step by step, from a general outline of your story to a script that contains the full dimensions of your film, including locations, actions, dialogue, sounds, and movement. This process of working and reworking your film's story material, adding, cutting, or refining details along the way, is called script development. Concept. The concept is a very brief outline of the basic elements involved in your story. It describes in no more than a few sentences the essential dramatic engine that will drive the movie. Who is your main character? What is the central dramatic question around which all of the action revolves? And how does it end? A good concept outlines the general shape of the narrative material. These are the elements that translate an idea for a film into something that is, in fact, a dramatized, filmable story. The descriptions of the basic story elements for Pieces of April, page 11, and Bread and Alley, page 17, are good examples of concepts. Here's an example from one of my students. This is not me, this is the author saying that. George Rax, who was making his second film, his first with synchronized sound. George has a 4-year-old niece, and he was enchanted by her vivid imagination. He had the idea to somehow capture in a movie her belief in wondrous and magical things. His intention was to charm an audience by allowing us to see the world for a moment through the eyes of this innocent, imaginative girl. And, as George told me, quote, "Through Panna, I want to invite the viewers to rediscover those small magical moments which they once believed in." Illustration figure 2-1. George's intentions were clear, but it was not yet clear how he would accomplish this on film. What would he point the camera at? What would the little girl do? What would the audience actually see on screen that would charm them or make them see the world as Panna sees it? In short, what's the story? George quickly turned his general idea into a specific film concept. Ideas in their raw form do not constitute a film story. Once you have an idea, you need to translate it into a film concept with basic but very specific story elements. See page 5. This is the beginning of your script development process. Once your concept is working, then you are ready to write a treatment where you'll develop more specific details. Treatment. The treatment is a prose description of the plot written in present tense, as the film will unfold for the audience, scene by scene. Figure 2-2. The treatment is a story draft where the writer can hammer out the basic actions and plot structure of the story before going into the complexities of realizing fully developed scenes with dialogue, precise actions, and setting descriptions. The treatment is the equivalent of a painter's sketch that can be worked and reworked before committing to paint on canvas. It's much easier to cut, add, and rearrange scenes in this form than in a fully detailed screenplay. Generally, a treatment involves writing a few sentences for each dramatic event, also called a narrative beat. A bold term, narrative beat, is a dramatic event in which the action, decisions, or revelations of that moment move the plot forward either by intensifying it or by sending it in a new direction. In other words, a treatment sketches in the essential events. For a short film, the treatment might be 1 to 3 pages long. For very simple short films, you can simply write one sentence describing each narrative beat. This shorter version is called a step outline or a beat sheet. Author's draft. The author's draft is a first complete version of the narrative in proper screenplay format. The emphasis of the author's draft is on the story, the development of characters, and the conflicts, actions, settings, and dialogue. The author's draft goes through a number of rewrites and revisions on its way to becoming a final draft, which is the last version of the author's draft before it is turned into a shooting script. The aim of an author's draft is to remain streamlined, flexible, and, quote, readable. Therefore, technical information such as detailed camera angles, performance cues, blocking, or detailed set description is kept to an absolute minimum. It's important not to attempt to direct the entire film shot for shot in the author's draft. The detailed visualization and interpretation of the screenplay occurs during later pre-production and production stages. In this chapter, we'll look closely at some essential principles for script language and for formatting the author's draft. Shooting script. Once you have completed your rewrites and arrived at a final draft, you'll be ready to take that script into production by transforming it into a shooting script. The shooting script is the version of the screenplay you take into production, meaning it is the script from which your creative team, the cinematographer, production designer, etc., will work from and which the film will be shot. A shooting script communicates, in specific terms, the director's visual approach to the film. All the scenes are numbered on a shooting script to facilitate breaking down the script and organizing the production of the film. This version also includes specific technical information about the visualization of the movie, like camera angles, shot sizes, and camera moves. Chapter 5 deals with the process of creating the shooting script. Formatting the author's draft screenplay. The screenplay is a multi-purpose document. It's both a literary manuscript conveying the dramatic story for a reader and a technical document that anticipates the logistics of the production process and allows everyone involved in your project to see what they need to do. The technical functions of a screenplay are realized in the format of the script, which is standardized to facilitate common film production processes. This is why a screenplay looks unlike any other literary manuscript. Beyond the technical formatting of a script, the language of the author's draft screenplay, its style and detail, communicates the spirit of the visual approach, the tone, the rhythm, and point of view of the final film. Embedded in the author's draft are your first thoughts on visualizing the story for the screen without the use of camera cues and technical jargon. If written well, an author's draft script should help everyone involved in your project see what you are striving for, thematically and visually. Elements of an author's draft script. There are 6 formatting elements used in the screenplay form: title, scene headings, stage directions, dialogue, personal directions, and character cues. They're given an example here, which I'm just going to cut out from this reading. It's an example of a script. General principles. A screenplay is written as the film would unfold to an audience. It's written in the present tense and must follow the progression of the film, moment by moment, scene by scene, as you wish it to appear before an audience. There is no literary commentary in a film script, and this necessitates 2 important practices. The words on the page present each scene, action, image, character, and series of events to a reader as they would appear to the viewer of the film. We will get the detail only when it's revealed to the audience. The screenplay builds its story one moment at a time in the same way the film will. And in the beginning, in this script example that you don't see because it's on the page in front of me, In the beginning, we see there is a food vendor serving people. There should be nothing in the script that the film's audience will not see or hear. In general, nothing goes on the page that can't be realized on the screen in images and sound. These are the fundamental tools of a filmmaker, and therefore they are the tools of the screenwriter as well. In prose fiction and poetry, it's common for an author to explain to the reader what people are feeling, or something about their personal history that might be informing the action they're taking, or what characters are secretly thinking, or even what subconsciously motivates them. In film, we must dramatize these internal states. To dramatize is to externalize and reveal the internal through actions, dialogue, and visual context. More examples from this page that you don't see as you listen to this. If you're true to the moment and the voices of the characters, the intentions behind each line in your script should be apparent. We can feel impatience or somebody verging on pushiness in the words and actions of a New Yorker, so there's no need to announce that they're a pushy person. See it rather than tell it. It would, in fact, completely ruin the scene. Internal feelings and intentions may be part of what's going on, but they're going to be expressed in a way that's cinematic. However, the filmable actions, things that people do, things that they do between each other, will vividly reveal how they're feeling and thinking and what they intend to do. Presented this way, we also understand that this interaction is a routine based on the physicality. It is far better to simply show things as they happen and let the audience discover a character's intentions for themselves. Scene headings or slug lines. The scene heading is our first introduction to each and every scene and establishes the fundamental time and location information in order to set the scene. What is a scene? A scene is a dramatic moment that has unity of both time and location. If you make a jump in time, say, from night to day, you need to begin a new scene. Change location and you must begin a new scene, even if that change is only from the living room to the kitchen of the same house. In addition, scene headings play a vital role in the disassembly and reorganization of the script in preparation for creating production shot lists and shooting schedules. Okay, I'm skipping a bunch of visual stuff on the page that we can go over in class. Stage directions. Stage directions are where most of your creative writing takes place. This is where you describe, always in present tense, the actions of the characters, the settings, the images, and all non-dialogue sounds. In short, this is where you write what you see and, other than dialogue, what we hear. We'll discuss the role of style and the art of visual writing in more detail later. But as a general rule, you shouldn't elaborate on actions, settings, and movements in extreme detail. Too much extraneous description will bog down your script. When you write a screenplay, words and space are at a premium, so include only the essential details to tell your story. I'm skipping a little bit here that's specific to a screenplay sample on the page. Later in the production process, details and other things will be decided, but in the script, they're not essential. The umbrella in this example they give in the book, however, is important to the story. But for example, the color isn't. Other stage direction rules. There are certain instances when words and names need to be written in all capital letters in the stage directions. Again, this is part of the technical function of the screenplay. One is character introductions. The first time a character actually physically appears in the film, you must use all capital letters for their name in the stage directions. This allows a producer and casting agent to see at a glance how many characters there are in a given script, and it also allows actors to quickly find their scene. Once you've introduced a character using all capitals, then you write the character's name normally for the rest of the screenplay. This rule applies to minor characters as well, but not to extras. Sound cues. Anytime you have a sound that is not created by a character actually in the scene, like for example, the example on the page you can't see, siren blip, which is in all caps, is an example, and it needs to be capitalized. This is a reminder that although the sound is not in the scene as you shoot, the performers will still have to account and act as if it's there during the shooting. If, for example, you're shooting a scene in which a character hears capital church bells in the distance, the bells will not likely be sounding during the actual shooting. Yet the characters still need to react as if they were. Also, this is an indication to the sound designer to find these sound effects for post-production. Readable text. Anything intended for the audience to read must be put in quotation marks. This reminds the director and cinematographer that they must compose the shot so that the audience is able to read the text of, say, a closed sign on the door of a diner or a happy birthday banner on the wall. Excuse me. Welcome to Kansas is another example. Character cues. Character cues indicate which character speaks the lines of dialogue which follow. So those are also all in caps. These are simple, but there's a few rules to keep in mind. Keep the name consistent. If my character's name is Bob, don't call him Robert later or Mr. Jones somewhere else. Only one character per name. If I have two characters named Jane or Janie, you can't keep them both because you're just going to confuse them. You should refer to them by their last name in this case. You may refer to characters by a role. It's common for minor characters to be referred to by their role, such as tourist or police officer. Additional information. Voiceover, off-screen, and other delivery indicators. The character cue line sometimes carries other information about the delivery of the actual dialogue. Occasionally, you'll have a character speaking off-screen or in a voiceover, or the dialogue may come over the radio. So you need to have these items in parentheses. Off-screen implies that the character is present in the scene, in the place, but they're not visible from the camera's current angle or perspective. Voice-over implies that the person speaking is not speaking from that time and place like a narrator. Off-screen and voice-over indications are always abbreviated. They're in parentheses. Off-screen is abbreviated as O.S. and voice-over is abbreviated also in parentheses with capital V period, capital O period, respectively. And these are located after the character cue. You can also indicate in parentheses TV or radio if the dialogue is being broadcast. Dialogue. Dialogue is what your characters say. Using proper margins and single spacing are pretty much the only formatting rules that apply for dialogue in a screenplay. However, dialogue is the other area where your creative writing and stylistic skills come into play. When you consider that dialogue is the quote voice of your character and that everything from the dialogue's content, tone, grammar, rhythm, and accent all serve to define the person speaking those lines and establish their credibility, then you begin to realize that determining what your characters say is not so simple. The main principle for stage directions, stick to the essentials, also applies to dialogue. One common mistake early screenwriters make is to overwrite dialogue. We'll discuss working with dialogue in another chapter, and this really doesn't apply to your films, your 16mm films. Personal directions are always very brief, placed in parentheses, and don't have any capital letters unless you use a proper noun. They refer only to the person speaking the lines in which they appear. Personal directions are one of the most misused elements in a screenplay. Novice writers tend to use personal directions to tell actors how to perform lines. This is a mistake in two respects. First, the line itself should evoke the emotional tone of the delivery, whether it's, for example, sorrowful, joyful, wistful. That should be in the dialogue, without you having to label that it's that way. If a line is not sarcastic, then labeling it with the personal direction sarcastically will not make it sarcastic. Also, generally speaking, actors will try to make the emotional decisions for the lines and the scene. When you use an emotional cue like sorrowfully, you're closing the door to an interpretation of the line that could in fact enrich your film. The emotional approach should be evident in the situation and dialogue itself. And if there's room for interpretation, then this is worked out between the director and actors in rehearsal and shouldn't be codified in the author's draft. Okay, so when do we give directions? Important but very small actions that must happen at a precise line of dialogue. The example is shown in the book, so you'll have to look at page 30 at this point. Receiver of dialogue in group scenes. Occasionally, it might not be clear to whom your character is speaking, especially in group conversations. So instead of constantly embedding the name of the receiver of the dialogue in the lines, which is amateurish and cheesy, by the way, we can simply indicate it in personal directions. For example, you would have a line of dialogue, and in parentheses right under it, it would say, "To Bob." Margins, fonts, and spacing. Margins, fonts, and spacing are an important part of formatting because they ensure that each script page reflects 1 minute of screen time, more or less. A 15-page screenplay will yield a 15-minute film, approximately. There are several commercial software programs that automate this aspect of formatting. There's Final Draft, there's Movie Magic Screenwriter. You can also find free script formatting software online. One is called CELTX, which I believe is pronounced Celtics. You could even set margins yourself manually on your computer or if you like a typewriter, but no matter how you do it, you must get the margins and spacings correct. For the exact formatting specs of a screenplay, go to the website for this textbook, which is at www.voiceandvisionbook.com. Screenplay, language, and style. Visual, writing, character, and action. Show me, don't tell me. In film, as in life, actions speak louder than words. Someone can announce "I love you" and it sounds great, but can you trust it? "I really, really love you." Pretty words, but perhaps too easy to say. But if that person actually shows their love by leaving a great job or beloved city and all their friends to follow you to another state because they can't live without you, then you might think, gee, they did that for me. They must really love me. When you write a script, try to do as much as possible with actions. Converting feelings, intentions, and character traits into actions and behavior is at the heart of screen drama and is essential to establishing an indelible understanding of character. Turning the page, there's more examples from a screenplay that's here in the book. Next item. Write with precision. The first thing to remember is that when you are writing a screenplay, you are a writer. As a writer, your tools are words, so you need to be precise with your language and find the specific words that will convey not just the action, but also the tone and mood of the situation. The author of the Ocean's 11 script does not say, "Linus lifts up the man's coat, opens his pocket, reaches in, and pulls out his wallet." Yeah, that's basically what happens. But put this way, the reader would imagine that Linus is a hapless clod who could not possibly get away with this. So instead, he writes it this way. Linus, his face always forward and inscrutable, gingerly raises one tail of his target's Brooke Brothers jacket, and then, with incomparable dexterity, unbuttons his wallet pocket with a flick of his thumb and forefinger, and eventually relieves the man of his wallet. So compare those two examples. The author has written only the actions, but the precision of the passage allows us to really, quote, see the crime. And it's also showing us Linus's expert abilities at picking pockets, a skill he will need later in the film. Keep in mind that not all actions and details are equally important. In stage directions, we stick only to the essentials. The amount of time and words you use to describe something determines its importance in the scene. Lavish special attention and language only on those moments that are critical to the storyline. Next item. Use images, not camera cues. In an author's draft, we avoid as much as possible the inclusion of camera cues, indications such as close-up or zoom in or camera pans. Avoid those. However, it doesn't mean you can't indicate a close-up or a wide shot if you really feel it's necessary to tell a story. As a screenwriter, you need to describe in prose an image or action that suggests to the reader or a director to use the close-up or a long shot or whatever else you intend. This is the essence of the visual writing. Again, an example from Ocean's 11. The screenwriter Ted Griffin writes this. Linus, his face always forward and inscrutable, gingerly raises one tail of his target's Brooke Brothers jacket, and then, with incomparable dexterity, unbuttons his wallet pocket with a flick of his thumb and forefinger. And here's another example. From halfway down the train car, nothing appears amiss, and no passenger looks wiser. This passage is written to invoke 3 different shot sizes. In order to show his inscrutable face and lifting up the coattail, we need to be close. And then a medium shot. Then for us to really see the dexterity, something like the flick of the thumb, we need an extreme close-up. Finally, to take in the image of the other passengers in the train, we need a long shot. We can't visualize this image with the close-up, so language does show us the shots in prose rather than labeling them. Again, be careful not to overuse this technique. Invoke a precise image only when you really need it to tell the story. Next item. Paragraphing stage directions and audience point of view. We use paragraphing in stage directions for 3 reasons. The first is to distinguish different locations within a single location. Notice how each time the author shows Danny, okay, this is an example that I can't show you, but this is from Ocean's 11. Each time he shows Danny, the paragraphs shift each time the reader's point of view shifts from one character to another. They're both occupying the same space. The second reason we use paragraphing is to distinguish dramatic beats and shape the progression of the scene. Paragraphing helps the reader feel when one dramatic moment has ended and a new moment has begun. Yes, this episode on the train is one large dramatic unit. Danny watches Linus pick a businessman's pocket, but tension is created by breaking this task into dramatic, smaller beats and slightly rearranging the details to reveal the situation to the audience in a more suspenseful way. The third reason to paragraph is to further highlight very important moments or details. The dramatic question in this scene for Danny, Linus, and the reader, and this is all from Ocean's 11 again on page 34 of your book. The dramatic question of this scene is, will Linus successfully pick that wallet? So the climactic moment and action is when he actually picks the pocket. For this reason, the screenwriter has set that moment off in its own paragraph. Character versus voice. In Ocean's 11, the example in your book again, the actions we see Linus perform tells us who he is. He's a thief, a skilled thief, who's using his abilities to pull off petty crimes. We believe it because we saw it. Character is defined through actions. Voice, on the other hand, is the way in which people present themselves to the world. This could be through their style of dress, the way they decorate their apartment, and of course, the way they speak. Dialogue can be written in harmony with what we understand of that character through their actions, or it can provide another layer of complexity, or it can even be contradictory or try to conceal what we see. With his, quote, frayed jacket, unquote, and polite apology, Linus presents himself as an average nice guy, which the brokers believe, but we know better because we've seen him in action. Another good example is Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. Through his dialogue, Hannibal presents himself as an erudite, cultured, refined, courteous gentleman. At their first meeting, he even tells Clarice Starling, quote, discourtesy is unspeakably ugly to me, unquote. This is no one we should fear, right? Until we see him literally rip the face off a police guard. Lecter is a great example of the tension you can create with a dissonance between character and voice. So, if you're able to establish your character's essential nature through actions, then dialogue, your character's voice can be used to add and refine other facets of their personality. Remember, action equals character, dialogue equals voice. Working with dialogue, revealing emotions, not announcing them. Ideally, dialogue should reveal a character to us. It should illustrate what that person is thinking, feeling, and wanting instead of broadcasting these things directly. In this way, the show me, don't tell me principle also applies to dialogue. The scene that's going to be on the following page from the script from Alexander Payne's Sideways is an example of dialogue that is on the surface about one topic. In this case, wine, but in fact reveals an enormous amount about the internal yearnings and struggles of the lead character, Miles. Although Miles is clearly lonely, he's finding it impossible to get over his recent divorce and resume his life. In this scene, Miles, who's a wine aficionado, finds himself alone with Maya, an attractive acquaintance. While his buddy Jack is having casual sex in the other room with a woman he only just met. Miles and Maya are sitting on the front porch drinking wine. And Miles laughs at first because of a personal question he braced himself. It turns out to only be about wine. Yet Maya finds his answer surprisingly revealing, as we do. Through Miles' passionate description about the Pinot Noir grape, he unwittingly reveals his loneliness, that he, like the Pinot grape, is difficult to nurture but ultimately well worth the time and care. So the question ends up being deeply personal after all, and his subconscious revelation betrays his romantic interest in Maya. Also, his answer poses questions of his own to Maya. Are you patient and caring enough? Will you take the time to truly understand me and my potential? The other interesting nuance in this monologue, which is on the page 36. Another interesting nuance in this monologue is the comparison of grape varietals, which serves as a comparison of Miles' personality with that of his friend Jack. His buddy in the other room, who easily picks up women to have casual sex, is clearly the Cabernet grape, which can grow anywhere and thrive, while he is more like the Pinot, meaning Miles. Thin-skinned, temperamental, and needs constant care and attention. Next section. Words and grammar define voice. As with stage directions, your choice of language is crucial in dialogue. The words your characters use and the grammar they employ express their unique identity, both who they are and how they wish to be seen. Throughout Sideways, Miles is an exceptionally nervous and awkward character, especially around women. In the scene before our example, he stumbles over himself to describe the novel he's working on to Maya. However, in this scene, Miles is in his comfort zone. He's eloquent, even literary when speaking about wine. This reveals to the audience that not only is he knowledgeable about wine, and that yes, hidden under all the anxiety, Miles is also passionate, thoughtful, and an interesting person. But it's not that easy for him at this moment in his life. He must be coaxed into his fullest expression. And that's in quotes because that's part of his line of dialogue. Okay, we're going to skip over for a second to a quote by Stanley Kubrick about dramatizing a story. I'm always reluctant to single out some particular feature of the work of a major filmmaker because it tends inevitably to simplify and reduce the work. But in this book of screenplays by Krzysztof Kieslowski and his co-author Krzysztof Piesowicz, it would not be out of place to observe that they have the very rare ability to dramatize their ideas rather than talking about them. By making their points through the dramatic action of the story, they gain the added power of allowing the audience to discover what's really going on rather than being told. They do this with such dazzling skill. You never see the ideas coming, and you don't realize until much later how profoundly they've reached your heart. Okay, skipping up to another section. If characters announce their feelings and intentions, if they discuss the story they're in rather than just being in it, then the audience has no reason to become emotionally involved. Believable and engaging characters inhabit, act, and react within the world of film and the events that swirl around them. They, quote, do things, and the viewer pieces together this display of human behavior to determine why they do what they do. This dynamic is critical to encouraging the audience investment and involvement in your story. Many times, a gesture or a look will expose in much more eloquent and human ways what someone is feeling than the verbal articulation of that feeling. Often, what is not said speaks louder than the explanation ever could. Also, visual details like locations, clothes, and objects can reveal an enormous amount about the specific dramatic situation and context. So there's a very large section here in the book with screenplay examples. I'm going to give you essential info without going into the examples since you can't see them. Okay, next section, reworking and rewriting. Whether a project is a 3-minute chase scene with no dialogue or a complex character-driven emotional drama, narrative filmmakers are storytellers, and the unfolding of events that make up the film stories are first hammered out and polished on the page. The first steps in narrative film production involve developing your ideas on paper in concept and treatment forms, and then writing a screenplay. Each of these steps constitutes a reworking of the story. When it comes to the script itself, an often repeated axiom is that the writing is rewriting. It's important to remember, let me say that again. The oft repeated axiom is writing is rewriting. It's important to remember that a screenplay is not written in stone. It's not unusual for screenplays, shorts, or features to go through many rewrites. Students in the author's intermediate production class will typically pen 5 or 6 drafts of their 10-minute film before heading into production. Some of these rewrites are simply to improve the script, while others are in response to real-world problems, like losing an important location, which must be worked into the script in such a way that they also improve the script. Screenplays should remain flexible and can be written at every stage in production, including the editing phase, to respond to new ideas, creative collaboration, production circumstances, practical concerns, and spontaneous inspiration. The better the script, the better your film will be. So, it's essential not to shortchange these crucial creative steps out of impatience and eagerness to get on the set. It's better to postpone a shoot in order to give yourself the time to get your script into shape. Woohoo! End of chapter 2. You did it. Bravo. I'm talking to you who's listening, not me.